The idea of miracles has always intrigued humanity, especially when it comes to extraordinary events that challenge our understanding of reality. One of the greatest mysteries of the Christian faith is the resurrection of Lazarus, a divine manifestation that many consider a pure and inexplicable miracle. However, science, with its ability to investigate both the natural and the supernatural, suggests that even the greatest miracles might have a scientific explanation. But does that diminish the divine power of God? Or is it possible that behind the natural laws lies the divine touch, guiding the world in ways we have yet to understand? The question remains, how can science and faith coexist in the realm of the supernatural? From the very beginning, God created the universe with perfect order, establishing the natural laws that govern every aspect of creation. In the book of Genesis, we find the account of the world's creation, where each element was made meticulously and with a clear purpose. The land was separated from the waters, light was created to divide day from night, and all life was formed according to its kind. But beyond the spiritual account, science, with its careful and methodical gaze, reveals that these laws of nature are not mere coincidences, but a reflection of the divine mind that designed and structured everything with precision. The laws of physics, for example, which govern the movement of planets, gravity, and the interactions between subatomic particles, are manifestations of God's will. The complexity and harmony of these laws suggest that they did not arise from nothing but from an ordering mind that conceived a universe where every part fits together perfectly. Biology, with its processes of life and death, can also be seen as an extension of the divine plan. Every cell, every organism, follows a code that reflects the intelligence of God. What science reveals to us, in fact, is only a glimpse of God's grandeur. Through scientific discoveries, we begin to understand how the world works and how elements interact with each other. However, science, although powerful, has its limits. It can explain the natural laws, but it can never grasp the essence of the one who created them. Divine creation is much more than a set of laws, it is the expression of God's infinite love and wisdom. Therefore, science should not be seen as something that contradicts the presence of God but as a tool to help us better understand His power and greatness. When we study nature, we are, in a way, learning more about God, for He is the one who established the universe's order. When we look at the cosmos, the perfection of our bodies, or the workings of a simple atom, we are witnessing a reflection of God's creative work. Science and faith, therefore, are not antagonistic, they complement each other, helping us to admire even more the majesty of the Creator. However, it is important to remember that science, even in its most advanced form, will never be able to fully explain the greatness and depth of divine power. While it may describe the how, the why, of all things lies beyond our understanding. And that is what makes faith essential. Science can give us the answers we seek about how the world functions, but it is faith that allows us to see God in every detail, in every law of nature, in every movement of the cosmos. Faith helps us realize that behind all this order, there is a higher intelligence guiding everything with wisdom and love. Thus, when we understand that natural laws are not merely a set of impersonal rules, but expressions of God's power, our faith and science can walk together. Science leads us to recognize the universe's order and the beauty of how everything works, while faith teaches us to admire and trust the Creator who established that order. Together, they reveal a profound truth: God not only created the universe but also sustains and guides it, revealing His power through the laws that govern everything around us. As we reflect on creation and science, we are invited to acknowledge that, although science shows us the wonders of the natural world, it is faith that allows us to see the divine hand in each of them. Therefore, God's creation and science are not in conflict but in perfect harmony, inviting us to deepen our understanding of the universe while glorifying the Creator. The miracles recorded in the New Testament are fundamental for understanding the mission of Jesus Christ and the power of God on earth. Throughout the Gospels, we witness a series of extraordinary events that defy natural laws, yet always carry a deeper reason behind their manifestation. The healing of the sick, the multiplication of food, the resurrection of the dead, all of these miracles are not just signs of Christ's power, but also expressions of divine love and the promise of salvation for humanity. But what happens when we attempt to understand these miracles through the lens of science? How can faith and science coexist when it comes to the miracles narrated in the New Testament? Let us begin with one of the most well-known miracles, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, narrated in all four Gospels. According to the accounts, Jesus fed a crowd of 5,000 men with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. To the human mind, this appears to be an impossible phenomenon. The immediate scientific explanation might suggest some kind of illusion, such as the idea that the people in the crowd, seeing the generosity of a few, began to share their own food, creating the impression that a miracle was taking place. However, the Gospels do not imply that the miracle was a mere social coincidence. Jesus took what little there was and, after blessing it, made it sufficient for everyone, with 12 baskets left over. The scientific explanation does not diminish the significance of the miracle but places it in context. The idea that something impossible can happen is challenging for science, as science is built on observation, repetition, and the understanding of natural phenomena. Miracles, by their very nature, are not reproducible or verifiable by conventional scientific methods. This brings us to the central question: even if we can suggest natural or social explanations for these events, the presence of God as the author of the miracle can never be replaced or fully explained by science. He is the creator of the natural laws, but also sovereign over them. Another emblematic example from the New Testament is the healing of the blind, a recurring theme in Jesus' life. One of the most notable cases is that of a man born blind, healed by Jesus in John 9. When his disciples ask who sinned, the man or his parents, Jesus responds that neither did, but that it happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. The miracle of curing blindness is something modern medicine seeks to explain in various ways, especially through the development of treatments for eye diseases. But the miracle performed by Jesus goes beyond physical healing; it brings spiritual depth, restoring not only physical sight but also inner vision, illuminating the heart and soul. Science may treat physical blindness, but it cannot restore the human being's spiritual gaze. In fact, many of Jesus' miracles contain a spiritual transformation component, not just a physical one. The healing of the woman with the issue of blood, for instance, is a healing experience not only of the body but also of the soul and her life. She is not only healed from her ailment but also restored to society and the religious community, her dignity returned. For science, the healing of a disease like the issue of blood might be explained through medical interventions, but what Christian faith teaches is that Jesus not only healed physically, he also brought emotional and spiritual healing, something science cannot measure or comprehend. The resurrection of Lazarus, another remarkable miracle in the New Testament, is an event that also defies scientific understanding. Lazarus, who had died and had been buried for 4 days, is brought back to life by Jesus. This miracle is one of the most powerful demonstrations of God's sovereignty over life and death. Science, even with its advancements in biology and medicine, has no explanation for resurrection. But Christian faith teaches that Lazarus' resurrection was not merely a return to physical life but a manifestation of Christ's eternal power and a foreshadowing of his own resurrection. Science cannot explain the how of this miracle, but faith teaches us that, for God, nothing is impossible. These New Testament miracles show us that, although science may offer explanations about the how of certain phenomena, it will never be able to fully capture the depth and purpose of God's miracles. Science can help understand the natural processes happening in the world, but it cannot comprehend the direct and supernatural action of God, which goes beyond nature. Therefore, it is essential to realize that while science explores the method and the means by which events occur, faith teaches us that God is the author and principal agent of all miracles. Science does not diminish the supernatural nature of Jesus' miracles; it can, in a way, deepen our understanding of what happened, but never replace the belief that divine power is behind it all. Faith and science are not antagonistic but can be seen as complementary parts of humanity's search for truth. Science gives us the tools to explore the material and natural world, but faith leads us to recognize the divine mystery that permeates all creation. As Christians, we believe that God can work through the laws of nature but can also transcend those laws when necessary, demonstrating his power in ways science could never fully explain. A miracle in the New Testament is, therefore, an invitation to faith, a call to recognize the divine power that is not limited to scientific explanations but is present and active in every aspect of our lives. The natural laws that govern the universe are often seen as the foundation upon which life and matter are sustained. Physics, biology, chemistry, these sciences all seek to understand how the elements of the world interact and follow unchanging rules. However, upon deeper reflection, we can perceive that these very laws are not merely the result of chance or time, they are manifestations of divine intelligence and power. Every natural law that governs physics and life remarkably reflects the hand of God who designed and sustains the universe. For example, the force of gravity keeps the planets in their orbits, and the interaction between subatomic particles keeps matter cohesive and structured. These laws, which scientists study and which allow us to understand the world around us, are a reflection of divine order. God, in creating the universe, instituted these laws not only to organize creation but also to allow life to develop in an orderly manner. The world functions in an interconnected and precise way, and this is proof that the natural laws are a reflection of God's power and wisdom. However, it is important to remember that science can explain how these laws work, but it cannot assert their origin. No scientific theory can definitively prove why the laws of physics exist as they do. The reason the universe follows such a coherent and precise pattern is not a coincidence. This points to a creator who planned and established these rules. By understanding the laws of nature, we are, in a way, learning more about the character of God, his order, his consistency, and his greatness. Science has been one of the most powerful ways to explore and understand the mechanisms God used to create and sustain the universe. However, science alone is not capable of answering all questions. It can give us answers about the how, but the why of everything remains beyond our full comprehension. For example, biology can explain how living organisms develop and multiply, but it cannot answer the great question of why life exists, or why it is so complex and extraordinary. Science observes the wonders of the human body, with its intricate processes and complexity, but cannot fully explain the purpose or design behind that complexity. At the same time, the study of natural laws leads us to a fascinating conclusion: behind these laws is a God who, in addition to creating them, still sustains them. In Isaiah 40 verse 26, the Bible reminds us to look to the stars and contemplate the Creator who made them, who calls them by name and keeps everything in order. Science, in studying the universe, can help reveal the details of how God maintains his plan, but it will never be able to fully unveil the entirety of that plan. Moreover, the very act of studying and trying to understand nature is a reflection of human curiosity, which was given by God. In Genesis, God commissions humans to cultivate and keep the earth. A task that implies not only caring for creation but also studying and exploring the world around us. Science, therefore, is an extension of this divine mission, to understand God's creation in order to care for it better and, in doing so, to recognize the greatness of the Creator. When scientists make discoveries, they are not just uncovering mysteries, they are, in some way, revealing the marvelous acts of God, although they may not fully realize the profound impact of their discoveries. Nevertheless, even with all the power of science, there will always be limits to what it can achieve. Science can measure distances, observe the movement of celestial bodies, and even understand the interactions between atoms and molecules, but it cannot measure the love of God, the depth of his purpose, or the magnitude of his eternal plan. In its search for answers, science can come close to understanding how things work, but it will never be able to fully comprehend the purpose and divine wisdom behind them. Therefore, faith and science are not antagonistic, but complementary. While science explains the how of things, faith leads us to understand the why. Both show us different aspects of God's greatness. Science reveals his power in establishing an orderly and functional universe, while faith helps us understand the love and wisdom behind that universe. Together, science and faith help us see that God is not only the creator of natural laws but also their sustainer. He is not merely the author of creation, he continues to operate within the laws he himself instituted, upholding the entire universe with his invisible hand. Thus, we can conclude that science does not diminish divine power, it reveals it. Every time we study the laws of nature, we are, in some way, coming into contact with God's own power. Although science may not be able to explain everything about the greatness of God, it offers us a glimpse of the order and precision he established in the universe, inviting us to admire his majesty and power all the more. The fine line between what can be explained by science and what is clearly a divine miracle is a fascinating subject for reflection. When one witnesses an extraordinary phenomenon, such as an inexplicable healing or a supernatural event, the question arises, is this a miracle or merely a natural phenomenon not yet understood? The answer is not simple, as it lies at the intersection of faith, science, and the limits of human understanding. Let us consider one of the greatest miracles recounted in the Bible, the resurrection of Lazarus. According to the Gospel of John, Lazarus, after having died and been buried for 4 days, is brought back to life by Jesus, an act that defies all logic and human comprehension. To the scientific mind, this would be absolutely impossible. Death is final, and the biological processes that occur after death make the reversal of such an extreme state utterly unthinkable. Yet, when we view Lazarus's resurrection through the lens of faith, the explanation goes much deeper than the laws of biology can account for. Science might attempt to offer plausible answers, perhaps suggesting that Lazarus's body entered a state of hibernation or that there was some kind of diagnostic error regarding his death. Some might even argue that, in a very hot climate without modern medical care, Lazarus could have been prematurely placed in the tomb, only to awaken from a coma or a state of apparent death. However, such explanations fail to capture the truth of the miracle, that it not only defied death but was a direct act of divine power. No scientific explanation can attribute life to a human being who had already been dead and decaying for 4 days, as is clearly described in the Bible. This brings us to the question of how science and faith coexist. Science can, indeed, explain natural phenomena and provide explanations for many events that occur in the world around us, but it will never be able to fully explain the mystery of divine miracles. Miracles are direct actions of God that are not bound by the natural parameters science can measure. By definition, they are supernatural, occurring beyond the scope of human explanation. It is essential to understand that the presence of a scientific explanation for a phenomenon does not diminish its miraculous nature. The miracle lies not only in the extraordinary event but in the one who performs it. Even if science can provide a plausible explanation for certain natural occurrences, it does not negate the fact that these events are carried out by the sovereign power of God. A miracle, at its core, is a direct manifestation of divine will. The example of Lazarus shows us that, even if science attempts to explain it, the event itself remains a miracle. God, as the Creator, has absolute power over the laws of nature. He can, at any moment, suspend or even alter these laws to fulfill his purpose. The resurrection of Lazarus was not merely a violation of biological laws but a sign of God's authority over life and death. Science may speak of biological processes and death, but it cannot speak of the restoration of life granted by God. In the same way, many biblical miracles can be analyzed from a scientific perspective, but scientific explanation will never be sufficient to capture the magnitude of divine action. When Jesus calms the storm in Matthew 8, it could be described in meteorological terms as a natural event under control, but the act of calming it instantly, simply by his word, is a manifestation of God's sovereign control over creation. Even if science can suggest explanations for storm behavior, it cannot explain the divine authority to calm them with a word. Therefore, we should not see scientific explanations as opposed to miracles, but rather as complementary. Science tries to understand the how of many phenomena, while faith leads us to the why. Even if science offers explanations, it can never reveal the divine purpose behind a miracle. A miracle is not just a phenomenon that defies natural laws, but the manifestation of a power beyond nature, a power that can only be attributed to God. This understanding helps us maintain the correct perspective. Science seeks to understand creation, but God is the Creator. Science can offer explanations for how the world functions, but it will always be God who sustains the laws of nature and can operate them supernaturally at any time. Thus, every biblical miracle, whether a healing, a multiplication, or a resurrection, is a reminder that even though science studies natural processes, something far greater is at work, a divine power that transcends human understanding and continues to act in the world in mysterious and supernatural ways. Although we may seek scientific explanations for many miracles, we must always remember that these events are more than natural phenomena. They are signs of a God who acts in the world in ways that science, no matter how advanced, can never fully explain. Science may explore, but faith teaches us to recognize that the ultimate source of all power is God, who, even through natural laws, acts supernaturally to fulfill his plans. The miracles narrated in the New Testament of Christ are a crucial point in our understanding of how faith and science can coexist in a harmonious way. Each of these miracles was, without a doubt, a demonstration of divine power, but at the same time, many of these extraordinary acts can be analyzed in the light of scientific principles. However, the real question is not how science can explain these events, but how science and faith can complement each other, each offering a unique perspective on the same phenomenon. We see this clearly in the multiplication of loaves and fishes, one of Jesus' most famous miracles. The biblical account tells of a crowd of more than 5,000 people who were fed with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. At first glance, this miracle defies all the laws of physics and biology as we know them. How can such a large number of people be fed with so little? Science, as we understand it, would tell us that this is impossible. However, if we look through the lens of faith, what we see is a direct act of God, where he manifests his generosity and limitless power. Still, we cannot ignore that some scientific theories attempt to offer explanations for the phenomenon. For instance, some suggest that when Jesus distributed the loaves and fishes, those who already had food in their bags began to share, which led to a large amount of food among the crowd. Others point to the possibility of a group effect, where the generosity of some inspired others to do the same. While these explanations may be interesting, they do not explain the miracle as it is presented in the Bible. It was not an act of mere human generosity, but a direct manifestation of God's power. Science can help us understand how things work in the natural world, but it cannot capture the supernatural dimension of miracles. Miracles are not explanations for phenomena that follow natural laws, they are events that occur beyond what we can understand or measure. When Jesus multiplies the loaves, he not only satisfies the people's physical hunger, but also demonstrates divine abundance and generosity that go beyond human comprehension. Another significant example in the New Testament is the healing of the man born blind, found in the Gospel of John. Jesus, in healing the blind man, did something beyond the reach of medicine and science of his time. For the blind man, the healing was not just a physical change, it represented a profound transformation in his life and his spiritual perception. Science can explain how light reaches the eyes and how vision is processed in the brain, but it cannot explain how a man born without sight could suddenly have his vision restored by a divine act. The miracle of the healing of the blind man is, therefore, a perfect example of how faith is intimately linked to the mystery of divine power, which science cannot fully comprehend. This balance between faith and science becomes even more evident when we think about the act of raising the dead. Jesus raised not only Lazarus, but also Jairus' daughter and the son of the widow of Nain. For any scientist, death is an irreversible process, governed by biological and physical laws that cannot be undone. Science can investigate the decomposition processes of the body and the chemical reactions that happen after death, but it cannot bring a human being back to life. Resurrection is an act exclusive to God's power, and it is at this point that science recognizes its limitation. No matter how far science advances, it will never be able to understand or perform a miracle like the resurrection, for this is an act that transcends material reality. However, although science cannot explain miracles, it is not in opposition to faith. Science has a fundamental role in providing understanding of how the natural world works, while faith leads us to perceive the divine purpose behind these events. Both science and faith have their place in human understanding, and their coexistence can be seen as a harmony that allows for a deeper vision of God's creation. Science helps us understand the how of things, while faith reveals to us the why of miracles. Resurrection, healings, and the other miracles of Jesus are not merely issues of explaining how something happened, but of understanding the spiritual and theological meaning behind the event. They show us that God's power goes beyond human understanding and that, even in our efforts to understand the mysteries of creation, God continues to act in the world in ways that exceed our capacity for explanation. It is not science that should tell us whether the miracle is possible, but faith that teaches us that God has the power to operate beyond the limits of the possible. Therefore, the relationship between science and faith does not need to be antagonistic. Instead, it should be a partnership in which both spheres of knowledge, the scientific and the spiritual, collaborate to offer us a more complete understanding of nature and God's work. Science can explain the functioning of the human body, the physics behind healing, or the natural processes that sustain life, but faith leads us to recognize that beyond scientific explanation, there is a divine purpose and a sovereign power that cannot be contained by the limits of human reason. Ultimately, the miracles of the New Testament are not merely natural phenomena that can be explained by science, but signs that God, by His grace and power, acts supernaturally in the world, offering a glimpse of His eternal kingdom. And even when science tries to find an explanation, the true wonder of the miracle lies in its ability to transcend natural explanations and reveal the presence of God in action. As we delve into the complexities of science and human reason, there is an immutable truth that reminds us of our limitations. No matter how far science advances or how fascinating its discoveries may be, it will never be capable of fully explaining the divine mystery. Human beings, with all their intelligence and discoveries, will never be able to fully comprehend the nature and will of God. Science, no matter how powerful, is based on observations, theories, and explanations that are always limited to what we can perceive with our senses or measure with our tools. However, God transcends all these limitations, and His essence goes beyond our capacity for understanding. Science is an excellent tool for understanding natural phenomena, the makeup of the universe, and the complexity of life. It offers us models and theories that help us navigate the world and apply this knowledge for the benefit of humanity. Nevertheless, it is a product of human experience, born from our need to understand and control the material world. While it helps us solve problems and improve the quality of life, it is not sufficient to decipher the mystery of divine existence. God, by His eternal and infinite nature, cannot be confined to the rules of human science. When Jesus performed miracles, He was not bound by the natural laws that govern our physical world. A miracle is not a phenomenon explainable or reproducible by scientific methods, because divine intervention is beyond any formula or human experience. When Lazarus was raised after 4 days of death, science could show us how decomposition occurs in the human body, but it could never bring a man back to life. This is a mystery science cannot unravel, for it lacks the means to explain the supernatural. Miracles like the resurrection of Lazarus are not just extraordinary events, they are expressions of God's sovereignty and power. They show us that, although science provides a limited understanding of the workings of the physical world, there is something greater that surpasses our rational explanations, the action of God. He, the creator of the universe, is not restricted by the limitations of physics, biology, or any other human discipline. God's power operates outside the scope of science, in a realm where natural laws cannot restrain His will. When we try to explain miracles through the lens of science, we risk reducing God's act to a mere natural phenomenon. This does not diminish the wonder of the miracle, but it may cause us to lose the deep spiritual meaning of these events. Science helps us understand how the world works, but the true wonder lies in recognizing that God is beyond these explanations. He is not merely an effect of natural causes but the source of all things, the Creator who sustains and directs the universe according to His sovereign will. In many ways, science is limited to the study of what is visible and measurable. It can examine the behavior of subatomic particles or the flow of energy in our bodies, but it can never fully comprehend the mystery of how the Spirit of God acts in the world. When Jesus performed the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves, for example, it was not a simple matter of some chemical or physical reaction. It was an act of divine provision that surpassed any scientific explanation. There is also a fundamental limitation in science's ability to understand the why of things. Science can answer the how natural events occur, how biological systems function, but it cannot tell us the reason why God acts in a certain way. It cannot grasp the divine reasons behind miracles or the spiritual purposes that God seeks to reveal through his interventions in the world. Miracles, therefore, are not just extraordinary events, they are declarations of God's character and his relationship with humanity. This human limitation in understanding God also leads us to a profound reflection on our own search for answers. Science, unlike faith, seeks to explain and control. It has a drive to discover, classify, and understand, and this is a blessing in many ways. However, faith leads us to a different space, where mystery and the unknown do not need to be explained, but accepted as part of our spiritual journey. Faith calls us to trust in God's wisdom, even when we do not understand what he is doing. This is the opposite of science, which by nature seeks explanations for everything. No matter how much we investigate and question, science will never be able to give us all the answers about God. At most, it can point toward the Creator, revealing the complexity and beauty of the natural world as a form of testimony to his power. But the full understanding of God is beyond human capacity, and this is not something to be lamented. On the contrary, it is an opportunity to strengthen our faith and trust in something greater than ourselves. God, by his infinite essence, is beyond any human attempt at explanation. Science, with all its discoveries, will never be able to reach the totality of divine truth. While science seeks to understand the material universe, faith leads us to trust in the purpose and wisdom of a God who transcends everything we know. He is beyond our comprehension, yet still calls us into relationship with him, offering us a glimpse of his power through miracles and revelations. Therefore, at the end of our journey of scientific discovery, we are called to remember our limitation. Science, although essential, does not offer us all the answers. It will never be able to explain the deepest mysteries of life, such as the mystery of creation, eternal life, and God's redemptive work in Christ. These mysteries belong to the domain of faith, and it is in faith that we find true wisdom, a wisdom that is not limited by the boundaries of human reason, but that transcends understanding, revealing a God who is greater than all things. Throughout this journey, we have explored how science and miracles may at first appear to be divergent paths, but in reality, they walk side by side in mysterious ways. Science, with its immense power of investigation and discovery, allows us to understand the natural world and many of its complexities. However, it can never fully explain the mysteries of the divine, such as the supernatural power of God that manifests in miracles. Miracles like the resurrection of Lazarus are evidence that, despite all our scientific understanding, God continues to act in the world in ways that transcend natural laws. He is the Creator who governs not only the laws of physics but also the very course of life and death. Even when we try to apply scientific explanations to miracles, we must remember that the true source of these extraordinary events is divine power, something that science, no matter how advanced, will never be able to fully comprehend. As science continues to expand our horizons, it reminds us of our human limitation. No matter how far we advance in knowledge, God remains beyond our complete understanding. He is sovereign, and his power is infinite. Meanwhile, science, though essential to human progress, should be seen as a reflection of divine wisdom, not a replacement for faith. Thus, we are left with the question, can we reconcile faith and reason without diminishing the greatness of God? The answer seems clear. Science does not diminish God's power, on the contrary, it can be a tool to understand his creation more deeply. However, there are mysteries that remain beyond the reach of human reason, and these mysteries call us to a deeper faith and an even greater awe of the Creator. Ultimately, as we seek to understand the world around us, we must never lose sight of the fact that there is something even greater, something that surpasses human understanding, God, in his infinite wisdom and power. And in his immense goodness, he invites us to trust, to believe, and to marvel at his miracles, which are signs of his love and sovereignty, far beyond the capacity of science to explain.